We start in Syria, where rebel leaders have begun to assert their control, closely watched by the international community. The rebel leader who led the lightning offensive against the Assad regime has met with the outgoing Prime Minister in Damascus. The head of the so-called Joint Military Operations Command, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, has dropped the nom de guerre associated with his jihadist past and is now using his real name, Ahmed al-Shara. He's trying to bolster his legitimacy by presenting a more moderate public image. Syria's parliament, which was also pro-Assad, like the Prime Minister, says it supports the people's will to build a new future. What that will look like remains unclear, but many Syrians say it can only get better.
Some Damascus streets are covered in bullet casings, not from fighting, but from rejoicing over the fall of the Assad regime the day before. Syrians are looking forward to a new era ahead.
I came out today and thank God there's no fear. There's nothing to be scared of. Everything is okay in the country. We just hope the economy gets back on track and everything will be okay.
Rebel forces are patrolling the capital street. They are expecting many Syrians living abroad to return home soon.
Every Syrian people will come in Syria.
Millions of people have been displaced during the civil war. Many are now returning for the first time in years, like here on the Lebanese border. Checkpoints on the Syrian side are abandoned. While these people are returning home, Lebanon says some are also trying to leave Syria, given the uncertainty about how the current situation will unfold. The leading rebel force behind Assad's fall, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, is considered a terror organization by several Western countries. As the group is now trying to present itself in a more moderate light, some countries are reconsidering their stance towards it. The European Union, however, made clear
the European Union is not currently engaging with HTS or its leaders. Full stop. However, and let me finish with this, as HTS takes on greater responsibilities, we will need to assess not just their words, but also their actions.
And the United Nations says crimes committed during the civil war must be addressed.
Any political transition must ensure accountability for perpetrators of serious violations and guarantee that those responsible are held to account.
One day after the fall of the Assad regime, it's hard to say what direction the country will take. The international community is now closely watching developments in Syria. But among the uncertainty, the prevailing mood in Syria is one of hope and joy.
Let's bring in Dr. Heydemann here. He's a Syrian columnist and a consulting fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, London. Thanks for being with us. Tell us more about the rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. What role should we expect it to play in Syria moving forward?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the group has clearly been planning to play a key role, not only in the political sphere, but also when it comes to the security and defense sectors. The group and its allied factions who started the offensive that led to the collapse of the regime have already established some sort of foothold in the governance of not only Aleppo, but now they are talking about receiving or being handed over the government from, or the functioning of the government from the current government that was appointed by Bashar al-Assad. However, whether the group and its leader will be able to play that role is still yet to be determined. The group is still designated as a terrorist group, and there is a bounty reward for the head of his leader. The amount is $10 million. So it's not as simple as the group thinks. There will be discussions between international actors to determine whether A, that there will be any engagement with the group, and B, what role the group could play in Syria's future.
Yes, it remains a very fluid situation, many questions unanswered, but HTS has adopted a more moderate tone than one might expect, given its militant Islamist profile. It's promising to respect other religions, for example, and facilitate elections. Does that sound plausible to you?
It sounds plausible because the group has systematically and consistently been distancing itself from Al-Qaeda and from ISIS. The group cut ties with Al-Qaeda in 2016 and then later participating in fighting groups related to Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the areas it controls in northwestern Syria. But and recently, during the past 10 days, the group has also gave assurances and protection to minorities in different areas that were captured by them. Also, they have shown discipline and prevented violations in different areas. And now they are making statements that they will be willing to share power or even delegate some of the governing sort of tasks to other entities. But I think that the challenge right now goes beyond giving such promises and goes beyond giving assurances to minorities. The real test now is whether the group will be willing to really allow fair elections and allow power to be shared with other groups, and more importantly, allow a diverse and mutually accepted sort of political arrangement that will reflect Syria as a whole. If you look at the track record of the group in the areas they have controlled, especially in northwestern Syria, the group has allowed elections, but those elections were not legitimate, at least in the eyes of the people who lived there. So whether that will change or not remains to be seen.
Just very briefly, there are many groups in Syria, including Kurds. Are they likely to unite under HTS, do you think?
Well, I very much doubt that any group will unite under HTS. If we are talking about any future arrangement, the most likely scenario that there will be a coalition that HTS will be part of, rather than under the umbrella or control or dominance of HTS. Now, when it comes to the Kurdish issue in particular, the main challenge is not whether HTS will be willing to reach out or and establish discussions. The main problem right now is what role Turkey will play, because currently there are Turkish-backed forces that are fighting Kurdish groups in northeastern Syria. Exactly. Will Turkey allow groups affiliated with it inside Syria to establish that dialogue with the Kurdish forces? So far, it seems to be no, but the future could have different sort of prospects.
Dr. Hyde, Syrian columnist and consulting fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for more insights, I'm joined now by Andrew Sinclair. He's a senior advisor at the Center for Global Security and Stabilization with the Dexus Group in Washington, D.C. Andrew, the Assad regime has just been toppled. It's unclear what will happen next. What's your impression of the security situation on the ground in Syria right now?
Thank you, Terry. Look, opposition forces have completed in less than 2 weeks what they were unable to accomplish in 13 years since this uprising against Assad began. And it was accomplished without major fighting. Syrian government forces withdrew. And in the areas that the opposition has taken, we have not seen widespread violence or lawlessness, although there have been isolated incidents like in Manbij. And then for the region, while tense and uncertain, Israel and Jordan no longer have to contend with an Iran-friendly government on their doorsteps, and Russia is weakened in its ability to project power. So I think in the last 24 and 48 hours, we've seen also encouraging signals from both the outgoing Assad government and opposition forces to focus on a continuity of services and a peaceful and smooth transition of power. Certainly a lot remains to be done, but the early indications are promising.
Now, you're a specialist in dealing with Syria and in stabilization. Stabilizing Syria under these conditions, rebuilding the country, there's going to be huge challenges. Where is the next government in Syria likely to look for help with that?
They should look to the international community. But I would say and really emphasize here that this is a Syrian-led project. And I think while there are certainly dilemmas with al-Jolani and HTS being designated a terrorist organization by both the U.S., Turkey, and even the UN, and there are dilemmas with how to deal with that government if they do take power, I think we need to, as the international community, for the first time ever, see that these are the realization of the aspirations of the Syrian people and really ensure that they're in the lead of their future and that the goals and aspirations of the Syrian revolution, which, is a peaceful revolution started 13 years ago, is realized. And I think that will take patience. It will take, a concerted effort. But I would emphasize that the key to success here is ensuring Syrians are in the lead of their future, not the international community or outside powers, as had been directed by Russia and Iran through their alliance with the Assad regime.
When you look at the possible scenarios for Syria's future, Andrew, what do you think is most likely? Is there a danger that it could become another Libya right next door or Afghanistan? How can that be avoided?
Certainly, there are fears about what comes next, and I would say, those are legitimate and likely outcomes that could, cause the country to further descend into chaos. But really, one thing to emphasize is the cohesion of this anti-Assad coalition has been remarkable, and despite the bloodshed and suffering over the last 13 years, which has come at the hands of outside powers trying to dictate where the Assad regime goes and how they deal with the uprising that they've experienced. This is the first time that the Syrian people in more than 50 years are in the driver's seat of determining their future. And that is critical. And, another sort of point to emphasize is there's been a lot about the normalization that was coming at the hands of Assad with the UAE and other regional actors. And the state capture that was conducted by Iran and Russia was quite destabilizing. As your previous guest mentioned, there were millions that fled the country. Over half the country's been displaced. And while the moment is fragile, I think giving the Syrians a chance to lead and determine their own future is the best way to prevent it from falling into chaos and more instability.
There are many groups operating in Syria. There are many other outside countries who have been involved in Syria. ISIS is one of the groups that's still there. The U.S. is actively fighting the group with the help of the Kurds. How big of a risk is there of a major ISIS resurgence in Syria, Andrew?
Well, certainly that's a fear and a risk. But what we've seen is HTS coordination with the Syrian Democratic Forces and General Mazloum, which are leading the anti-ISIS fight. We saw over the last day more than 75 areas of ISIS presence hit by the international coalition to prevent a further exploitation of ISIS using this moment to sort of secure more land. And I think what we've seen is a real pragmatism by both the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and HTS. And again, I think the presence of the former prime minister of the Assad government staying in place to ensure peaceful transition of power, all of that continuity of security, governance, government services are really promising signs that the vacuum will not be exploited by actors like ISIS to conduct more threats to Syria and the region.
HTS was backed by Turkey. Turkey is a major regional player. It has issues with the Kurds in Syria. What role do you think Turkey will play in Syria's future in the medium term?
Well, certainly, Turkey comes out as ascendant in this in this scenario. There have been many reports that they at least greenlit the operation by HTS, although there haven't been formal confirmation of that. And I think what you've seen in the past, day or so since Damascus fell to the opposition is you've seen, thousands of Syrians who've been displaced in Turkey attempting to return to their homes. And that's a key point, sort of taking the reason that these people fled away, which was Assad. It can enable a real goal of Turkey, which was to find a permanent, more sustainable area where the millions of Syrians in their country could go back peacefully and with dignity to their homes. And I think there's still a lot to be determined on how the SDF coordinates with this new Syrian government in Damascus. And certainly Turkey will want to avoid any type of scenario that creates an autonomous Kurdish or even independent Kurdish state on their border.
Andrew, thank you very much for now. That was Andrew Sinclair, Senior Advisor with the Dexus Consulting Group in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Well, Professor Stephen Heydemann holds the Chatham Chair in Middle East Studies at Smith College in the United States. He's also a non-resident senior fellow in the Brookings Institution's Center for Middle East Policy, and he joins us from Washington. Welcome to DW, Professor. Are you cautiously optimistic now that Assad has gone?
I am cautiously optimistic. It's been quite striking how smoothly the very early days of this transition have gone in Syria. HTS and its partners in the operation that overthrew Assad are making all the right noises about responsiveness to the concerns of minorities. They're moving to maintain public order in Damascus and other major cities. They have offered assurances to the Alawi minority, to Christians, that they are safe, secure, and that their lives will not be interfered with during this transition. So from everything we've seen, the first few days of what's happened since the fall of Assad have been actually quite remarkable in how smoothly things have gone.
And we heard the Prime Minister talking about aiding the transition to a government chosen by the people. So this will be the next tricky bit of this transition. Do you think that that will actually happen?
Well, if we reach a point at which Syrians are able to participate in choosing a new government through elections, it's likely to take some time before we get there. There are huge numbers a huge number of issues that have to be dealt with well in advance of the possibility of holding elections. We need to imagine some form of interim governing authority emerging. There has to be a process of constitutional reform. There'll have to be some opportunity for Syrians to become acquainted with what a democratic system looks like and how it operates, for parties to form. And all of that will take some time. So it's entirely possible that Syrians will be able to participate in shaping a future government, but it's not something that I would look to as a very quick next step.
Let's take a quick look at some of the potential repercussions of this move, regional and farther afield. And can we start with its likely effect on Iran, which helped to prop up the Assad regime?
Well, Iran has suffered a number of fairly significant blows in the past 10 days, 2 weeks, and even longer. Its position has been severely weakened by the effect of Hezbollah's conflict with Israel. Hezbollah has suffered significant losses and no longer can play the kind of role that it had played for a long time as a leading ally of Iran and a principal deterrent against an Israeli attack on Iran. And now with the loss of Syria, the Iranian regime has seen the loss of an ally that had been one of its principal partners in what is known as the Resistance Front since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. It has lost the opportunity to move weapons to resupply Hezbollah through Syria. And it has really now found itself in a position in which it's going to have to think very seriously about how it can reconstruct some kind of deterrent posture given the losses in Lebanon and the loss of the Assad regime.
And how about Israel? How is Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition likely to view Assad's removal by Islamist insurgents?
Cautiously, I think, and we've seen that in the early statements of Netanyahu in response to the fall of Assad, in which he welcomed the change, but pointed out that Israel would be watching closely what happened on the ground. Israel's principal strategic concern in Syria for some years has been that Hezbollah and Iran would strengthen their position along Israel's northern border in southern Syria. And given the events of the past week, it now seems as if that threat has significantly receded. There is still some concern about how an emerging Syrian authority will conduct itself with regard to Israel. But it does seem to me that Israel's assessment is likely to be that it is now in a stronger position than it was a couple of weeks ago.
That's very clear. Thank you so much for outlining that for us, Professor Stephen Heydemann from Smith College and the Brookings Institution. Joseph Bahout is a Middle East expert and director of the Institute for Public and International Affairs. He joins us from Beirut. Welcome to DW. Now that Assad is gone, is it inevitable that HTS will lead an interim government?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. It is inevitable, at least so far. I mean, HTS, or what has become now the interim authority in Syria, is calling the shots, as you have said and you have heard. Today, the former prime minister who's ruling under Bashar al-Assad has resigned, and the HTS and al-Jolani in person has appointed, in a strange way, constitutionally or institutionally, a new prime minister who's close to the movement. Now, having said that, I think that the reality on the ground is much more complex and confused and a little bit more, let's say, pluralistic. HTS is by far, of course, the dominant group in Syria today. However, it's not the only group. There are other factions within the coalition that took Damascus from the north, meaning with al-Jolani and HTS. And then you have another faction, which is less Islamist, I would say, people coming from splinters from the former Syrian army and other rebellious groups that are a little bit more secular, who were mainly active in the south of Syria and the suburbs of Damascus. And then you have the political reality of Syria in exile, the body of negotiation, the Itilaf, what we call the Itilaf, or the former Syrian National Council, which is also a coalition of various leftist, sometimes Islamist, and other liberal forces. So the situation is very complicated. Right. Of course, on the ground today in Damascus, al-Jolani is the strong man. So far, he is calling the shot. But all this is very constrained also by an international conundrum over Syria, where you have countries like Turkey, the Gulf states, mainly the Emirates, Russia still playing a role, the Europeans, probably Iran in a way or another, and tomorrow US under Donald Trump. So I think it's now a situation in flux, and we'll have to wait to see where things will finally really wind down.
All right. Is there a potential that then that the country, Syria, will fragment, splinter, and we'll be looking at a different map in, say, 10 years?
I think the risk is there, of course, but it's very early to say that. I think that so far, and we have to acknowledge that, so far signs are more positive than negative, so far, and I hope that they will remain in this state. After a collapse of a regime that has ruled Syria for more than 54 years with an iron fist in a very brutal manner, to have such a bloodless transition today in Damascus is almost a miracle. And I think that many of us should salute that. Now, of course, the risks of splintering and fragmentation exist. First of all, the territory today in Syria is still not united. You have the coastal area, the area of the Alawite community, that is still in an unknown state. Of course, there are some negotiations probably going on to have these people accept the authority. And then you have the Kurdish faction, the Kurdish territory in the northeast of Syria, where probably a lot of people like the Americans, maybe the Israelis, a little bit the Russians, will try to negotiate with the new power in Damascus a sort of self-rule. Does this usher towards the fragmentation of Syria? It's very early to say.
Okay, that's very clear. The US and Britain are saying at the moment that they might take HTS off their designated terrorist group list. A sensible idea?
You know, it's sensible or not. This is realpolitik. I mean, these people are now in power. Bashar al-Assad's fall have been saluted by all these countries. They cannot at the same time do that and not find a way to negotiate or to talk or to work with the new power in Damascus. Now, of course, you have the facade of this government. They can say we talk to the government, but not to HTS. But this would be, first of all, very hypocritical. Second, very unrealistic politically, and probably in the long run counterproductive. But, you know, this shows also how, I mean, vain and sterile are these lists of terrorist organizations, because Western countries ultimately forbid themselves of talking to really, I mean, the people who are in charge. You like them or not, this is not the question.
That's very clear. Thank you so much for guiding us through that, Joseph. Joseph Bahout is from the Institute for Public and International Affairs. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.